while I was at the airport this morning, waiting for the arrival of Jerry Hutch, another major story broke, which was that there had been an arrest in connection with the investigation into missing Jo Jo Dullard. And Clodagh, you took yourself down to Naas, where there was a press conference.
Yes, never a dull moment on Crime World. So I headed off to Naas this morning, very intrigued by, Gardai said this morning there was arrest of a man in his 50s. So they then held a press conference a few hours later just to brief the press on the next steps in the investigation. So from that, we heard that Gardai were searching open ground at a location in County Wicklow. So this is on the Wicklow-Kildare border. And we also heard that they're expecting in the coming days to excavate it. There's going to be a forensic archaeologist that's part of the dig there, and there's going to be a technical examination as well in the coming days. We also heard that Gardai searched 2 private houses this morning in connection with the disappearance that has been upgraded to a murder investigation in 2020. Jo Jo Dullard's anniversary was only on Saturday just gone, so 29 years ago on November 9th, November 10th, in 1995 is when she was last seen. So that anniversary just happening over the weekend. There was an appeal put out by Gardai, and now it seems they've had this break in the case.
So it's a very notorious case for a couple of reasons. One, because she was so young, 21-year-old girl who was just been on a night out in Dublin and disappeared. She hitched a lift home and then disappeared, which is always going to be shocking. And the other reason for, I suppose, some of the notoriety around it is because of the link with Larry Murphy. But we know that the man arrested is not Larry Murphy.
Yeah, I think that was the first question on everyone's mind this morning. You see 50s and you think, well, is he in the country? Could it have been that was arrested? And of course, now we know it wasn't. But yeah, it was part of the Vanishing Triangle, of course. Annie McCarrick, Deirdre Jacob and Jo Jo Dullard were 3 of those women that were kind of assumed that their killer was not known to them. There has been very recent updates in Deirdre Jacob's case in that a file was put to the DPP. The intent was to prosecute Larry Murphy with murder. They came back with the direction of no prosecution. And of course, last year, Annie McCarrick's murder, just before the 30th anniversary, was upgraded to a murder investigation. And Gardai had revealed that they were working on a theory, I suppose, closer to home than what was originally believed when she was last seen in Enniskerry, County Wicklow. But it's now believed that, those kind of, the investigation is sort of centred around Sandymount, which is where she was living at the time.
So JoJo, let's just go through what happened to her. She was a young woman. She was actually, she was last seen at around 11 p.m. on the night of November the 9th, 95 at a phone box in Moon in County Kildare, which is just off the N9 every time I go past it.
Yep.
The sign, I think of her. But she made a call to a friend to say she'd just got a lift. She was hitchhiking home, wasn't she?
Yeah, she'd been out in Bruxelles, yeah. Many people will know, one of Dublin's most famous bars, with the Phil Lynott statue outside. People will, one of the sort of tourist spots. She'd missed her last bus home, and she had hitchhiked, I think, a certain amount of distance, and then had phoned her friend in Moon to say she'd been offered another lift. And I think that was that's the last known confirmed person to have spoken to her at that point.
So she had taken a late bus, yeah?
Yeah.
And then she'd taken a couple of lifts. It was unclear exactly. Did they track down everybody that gave her the lift at the time? See, this has gone on so long that the detail gets lost slightly in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it says she missed her last bus home to Kilkenny and instead got a bus
to Kildare.
To Naas.
Yes.
And then she intended to hitchhike the rest of the way to Callan in County Kilkenny, which I think is just on the border there, is it? Or just over the border. And they know she hitched a lift at Kilcullen, and then she hitched another lift to Moon in County Kildare. And in Moon, she made her call to her friend Mary Callanan. That was around 11:37, and during that call, Mrs. Callanan had said that that JoJo told her that a car had stopped for her and she was going to take the lift, and that's the last known interaction with her. And then ultimately, she was reported missing by her sister Kathleen, I think, the next day, when obviously she hadn't come home and a few hours had passed.
Yes, I'd actually heard her sister Kathleen was speaking on the radio just over the weekend about the disappearance, obviously with the anniversary, and she had mentioned as well, and this is something we had seen, was that she had been seen, well, there was a sighting of somebody who was believed to be Jo Jo Dullard getting into a dark car in Moon, County Kildare that evening, and that, I suppose, is kind of the last we've heard of her.
29 years have passed, which is, in criminal investigation terms, is a massive amount of time, obviously. For there to be an update in the case, there's been so many searches, so many guards involved. Obviously, at a later point, the Serious Crime Review Team, commonly known as the Cold Case Unit, became involved. So it's unusual for an arrest to come all of those years later. You would imagine somebody has handed up some specific information to the Gardai.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I suppose, the question on everyone's lips is why now? Is it something to do with the appeals that have taken place over the weekend in connection with that anniversary? And of course, every time there is an anniversary for somebody who's missing or an unsolved murder case, normally the Gardai do give a statement, or the family makes appeals for information. And, her sister was on News Talk on Friday, and she was, begging. She said she prayed a lot for, not only for JoJo to make that final journey home, but also for the strength of somebody, if they had information, to be able to come forward and know that all the family want is JoJo home. So now they are doing those digs. We don't know what that is. Obviously, it's in connection with the murder. There was 2 searches on homes. But the question is, what is that vital piece of information? What has all of a sudden come to light that has made Gardai arrest a man? Because this is the first time there's been an arrest in relation with her disappearance.
And of course, we spoke about Larry Murphy there. He was always this sort of spectre that hung over these cases. There had been a number of women that had gone missing without trace, and at one point, way back now, probably 20 years ago, it was decided that a special unit called Trace would be set up to see was there any links between any of the cases. And it involved the cases of Fiona Pender, Ciara Breen, and there were others.
Yeah.
But the links that were found were between those 3. And like Larry Murphy's name was put out and connected to Jo Jo Dullard's case.
Yeah.
He was connected to Annie McCarrick's case, and he was connected to Deirdre Jacobs' case, in particular Deirdre Jacobs, because there was certain evidence found that he had been sort of in the area and he had admitted to it in jail.
Yeah.
To a fellow prisoner. The situation was, this prisoner told the Gardai that he had got drunk one night and he had sort of boasted about the fact that he had pulled in on the side of the road outside Deirdre Jacobs' house and had punched her in the face, overwhelmed her and pulled her into the car. In the case of Annie McCarrick, it was the location where she went missing in the Dublin Mountains that sort of linked him to it. And though I don't think anything particularly else did, other than it was sort of seen as his hunting ground. And in the case of Jo Jo Dullard, it was because he was a sort of travelling carpenter and he was always on the road, and he seemed to have been in that general vicinity and area, and he used to take that road where she was hitchhiking. But clearly, did that, I wonder, colour, and did it sort of become the pure focus of the case for a long, long time? Yeah,
there was circumstantial evidence to place him in the location, absolutely. And obviously then there was an attempt under Operation Trace to see if there was a thread that went through them. And obviously Larry Murphy's movements matched with the disappearance of these women. But I suppose even in the middle of that, while Larry Murphy was certainly a person of interest, to say the least, there was never a kind of consensus around his involvement. It was always that circumstantial case, and there was always other people's were also persons of interest in that case, I suppose, which made it slightly different than some of the other cases. So, I mean, it is a big development for somebody to be arrested. People, I suppose, sometimes people think you can just arrest somebody casually. But after 29 years, for somebody to be arrested, the guards must have very specific information.
Or recommendations, because the Gardai Serious Crime Review Team do make recommendations, which is often to go back and question people. And I think they made 800 recommendations in the case of the Jo Jo Dullard files. So the original or the current investigation team will be going through those. But yes, an arrest is hugely dramatic. It's not like rechecking an alibi or anything.
No, they'll have to have specific information that they want to put to to the person that they can be questioned about. And if you think of the passage of time, that would be something quite specific and maybe even new. So it would be a big development and not done casually, to say the least. There's obviously two areas being searched, I think, and there's been, they're obviously looking for a body or looking for other evidence, and there's, I think, forensic people brought in as well. So obviously, like, you see these searches go on all the time, but if you're talking about a sort of rural area, they will have a very specific area that they're looking at, and again, they must have some sort of specific information. So it's, I'm sure for the family, it's a big day. The family, as you said, Clodagh, have done a lot of interviews over the years. They've really tried to keep the investigation alive, keep it in people's minds. It's really, really difficult for a family to have to keep doing that. They've also had to maybe put up with a lot of speculation and all of these things. And I think it will be a big moment for them to see that because it's such a common feature, isn't it, with these cases where the families just want to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I think the public as well. I mean,
hopefully something will be found and there'll be a bit of closure for them at long last. Obviously, if anything was discovered, there will be forthcoming legal cases, etc. But just for them to have her back.
Yeah, like this would be the first kind of, if, you know, they do find a body or find evidence, this would be the first of those 6 women in the Vanishing Triangle that's had any sort of real progress. You know, it'll be a shock to the families, those people who worked on those cases throughout their careers, the Serious Crime Review Team, Operation Trace, and the public in a wider sense have also been following this for almost 30 years, over 30 years now, since the disappearance of Annie McCarrick. And I think it will send kind of shockwaves through the country. But we'll keep an eye on it. And I mean, I'm just looking at the press release that was sent out on Friday in relation to her disappearance. Like, she would have been 50 now.
Really?
That's a huge chunk of life that's gone from 21 to 50. There was also this piece of, you know, evidence that came forward. I mean, you know, there was not a trace left behind, and that's the thing of any of these women. But very recently, there was a piece of information that was kind of been held for a long time in the Jo Jo Dullard investigation. That was the existence of this Walkman that she had. And a couple of years ago, I recall, you know, when they put out one of these anniversary appeals for information, they did mention it for the first time. It was this Sanyo cassette player that she had with her that hadn't been seen. I suppose such a snapshot of the time it was. So they were asking if anyone had been given that by a friend, if they remember having it. They were looking for hitchhikers, anyone who was around that Moon area at that time to come forward with information and get that justice for her. So can only wait and see what happens now.
All right. Well, look, thanks a million, Clodagh and Niall.
Thanks,
Nicola.